Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending on which part of the globe you are coming from. Especially to our speakers from Korea, I want to wish you a happy new year. This webinar has been organized by IMAP, the International Media Association for Peace. It is one of the 7 associations under the umbrella of the Universal Peace Federation, short UPF. For those who don't know, IMAP is a relatively young organization. It has only been founded 2 years ago by Dr. Hak Chan-moon, the wife of the late Reverend Sun Myung-moon. The association stands for press freedom, freedom of speech, religious freedom, family values, the rule of law, accuracy of reporting, and of course, promoting interreligious and intercultural dialogue and reconciliation, and more. The unifying motto of UPF and all 7 associations is interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values. The inauguration of IMAP took place in Seoul, in Korea, 2 years ago, almost exactly on the same day, to this day. In fact, that was where I've met the lady who will be our moderator. Her name is Mrs. Rita Payne. She was among the 400 media professionals who participated. I will soon say more about her. Interesting is that in February 2020, just a few weeks after the conference was held, COVID shocked the world, and international travel has been completely shut down. In fact, we could barely escape from Korea before the lockdown happened. It was like a miracle. This conference could still be done without any COVID cases. Now, let me just explain a few organizational points. Translation will be available in Russian, in French, and in Russian and French. I think one more language I heard. If you need translation, you should check the little globe icon on your screen and click the language you need. One other point is concerning your questions. There are 2 slots available. One chat slot. This is the one where also the short bios of the speakers will be posted as they proceed. And the other slot is for Q&A, for questions and answers. This is where you can post your questions, and I really hope that you will post some questions to the speakers. Our panelists may answer you during the discussion time after the speeches. Hopefully you can use this unique chance to pick the brains of some of the most qualified and informed media experts you can find in this world, especially with everything concerning Korea and the Korean Peninsula. Finally, please allow me to introduce our moderator, Mrs. Rita Payne. She's the former Asia editor of BBC World News, which is a TV channel. She's the president emeritus and of the Commonwealth Journalists Association. So Rita worked for nearly 30 years at the BBC until 2008, ending up as Asia editor, BBC World News, where she handled about 3 news programs a day. Before moving to TV, she was a news editor, producer, and presenter at the BBC World Service Radio. Lately, she served as president of the Commonwealth Journalists Association, and she is currently its president emeritus. Rita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter, and all your colleagues, and to all at the Universal Peace Federation. I am honored and privileged to be invited to take part in this most important webinar on trying to solve a problem that has been troubling the world, and this is how to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. The search for peace in the Korean Peninsula has been an elusive process. The Universal Peace Federation has been one of the few international organizations that has made this goal a priority and can boast of making progress. With its program of seminars, conferences, and other events with influential speakers, the Federation has been at the forefront of efforts to avert the threat of a nuclear war in the region, which would have devastating consequences for the entire world. In preparation for the World Summit 2022 to be convened in Seoul, Korea on February 10 to 14, 2022, with the theme Toward Peace on the Korean Peninsula, a Think Tank 22 Global Forum, which has been taking place from February 1st to 3rd, is focusing on opening the path to reconciliation, peace, and development on the Korean Peninsula throughout Asia and the world. Peter Zora, who has been telling us about IMAP, has been working throughout all hours of the day and night with his team to try and organize this event, which is intended to explore ways in which the media can contribute to finding an end to the deep hostility that has been haunting the Korean Peninsula. It is a privilege, as I said, to be invited to moderate with such eminent and knowledgeable panelists. I'm looking forward to hearing their thoughts on concrete ways forward and to the views of all of you who are participating. As you will have seen from the program, the panelists will speak for about 10 minutes each. I will have a brief discussion with them on points they've mentioned, and then we will take questions that you've been sent in. Since we only have 1.5 hours for the whole event, I hope the speakers will understand if I intervene politely if they exceed their allocated time. Now, let me just remind you of the speakers we will be hearing. Mr. Yonglin Oh, Dr. Felix Petrovich Kim, who is replacing, very kindly, Mr. Andre Shin, who has unfortunately had to pull out because he has COVID, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Then we have Mr. Chado Carroll, Ambassador Warwick Morris, and I will give you their full details before I start. So I will go first to our speaker, Mr. Yonglin Oh, President and Publisher of the Korea Times. Mr. Yonglin Oh is a graduate of Sungkyunan University in the Republic of Korea. He joined the Korea Times in 1988 as staff reporter and became a culture sports desk staff reporter. He subsequently worked at the City Business and Politics desk. And after serving in various deputy managing editor positions, Mr. Oh became managing editor in 2012. And after serving as chief editorial director, digital manager, and director of content and digitalization, he became the president and publisher of the Korea Times in April 2020. So welcome, Mr. Oh, and we would love it if you could start by giving us an overall view of why these elections in South Korea are important, how significant they are, and the main issues that we should be looking out for. So welcome.
Thank you for kind introduction, Rita, and hello to everybody. It's in respect, because of the time differences, here we are passing 10 after 6, the PM. I think it's back, in Australia, it's probably morning, 10 minutes after 10. And the Rita set the course for me, but I think, I need to deviate that, the course set by her. I think it's obviously the March 9th presidential election will have, the consequences for the new course, the Korea, the South Korea would take in terms of the reaching reconciliation with North Korea, or making moves, on the front of the creating peace on the Korean Peninsula. But I think, I wanted to talk about the potential Korea's role and what, the Korea can do. Not in the, the current format, but in the context of what is happening in Europe. I think, a lot of, the participants now in Europe, perhaps, I can make the, reference to the Ukraine situation and coming up with, the new role or attitude Korea can take in terms of the promoting unification. So I think, if I continue to, try to, make the introduction about what I'm going to say, I think, I'm only, end up, bringing confusion to you. I will, start, what I'm going to say, and please be the judge. Thank you for inviting me, first of all. I feel honored to speak to the people of your caliber. As I watch the Ukraine standoff, first and foremost, I wish for no Russian invasion, no bloodbath, no repeat of a Cold War era East-West confrontation. From the sidelines of the standoff, I have come to follow the behavior of United Germany in ever-changing situation over its neighbor. Its behavior is peculiar in that EU's biggest economy looks neither following the US leadership wholeheartedly, nor pushing the Vladimir Putin to the war. As a member of NATO, the Berlin could have been more forthcoming with an effort to suppress Russia's revanchist behavior. The rather, Chancellor Olaf Scholz appears making efforts to stop Moscow from an attack as much as prevent the US from escalating the situation. More simply put, Germany is reluctant to take sides, perhaps wishing to play the role of honest third-party broker to diffuse ever-looming conflict. It goes without saying that Germany has its greatest interest in a peaceful Europe, and that war is the most destabilizing event. I foresee a similar attitude and the role to be taken and played by United Korea. Now, there are both internal and external factors that block the Korean unification. I believe external impediments boil down to US-China rivalry. Both superpowers think alike. China thinks that if North Korea goes, it will lose a key buffer in the East and expose its flank directly to the American power. The US sees South Korea as one of the last lines of defense holding the Beijing's southward advance. So when it gives away, Japan will be the next to fall, and the US will lose its footing in Northeast Asia. Let me be a little bit bolder by suggesting that to US, losing Taiwan will be a great loss of face, while losing South Korea means a great strategic loss that can start its forced withdrawal from the region. For China, North Korea poses a dilemma. The Pyongyang is needed to bolster its hand against the US in the unfolding great game, but it is hard to control. And having uncontrollable leader with his hands on the nuclear weapons next door, it's not a comforting thought. And the scenario of tens of thousands of North Koreans crossing the borders into territory when its regime collapses would make Beijing lose sleep. Then could United Korea be an answer? I think so. If United Korea follows the behavior pattern of United Germany, United Korea would focus on its own survival and prosperity. As Germany does, it would refrain from the taking sides outright. For both Washington and Beijing, United Korea will stop serving interests of the other party unilaterally. The United Korea won't be a buffer to China against the U.S. forces, and neither will it be a dagger at the U.S. disposal targeting China in the neck. United Korea will most likely be more prosperous, will be a force to reckon with, then it will promote the balance of power in the region and help pave the way for lasting peace. When I talk about external factors, not internal the factors, I think that's the too many parties have a skin in the game regarding Korea's future. So they think to find a solution to solve a complicated question. I think one should decide where to start first. Once external factors are settled in the favor of unification, internal elements will have a better chance of getting settled. In a lot of aspects, what I said may sound wishful thinking, but when you wish hard, sometimes you get your wish. Thanks. I'm done.
All right. Hello, Mr. O. That is extremely clear and some interesting points that perhaps we haven't really thought about. So with your, from what you've been saying, the parallel with a unified Germany, if there's a unified Korea, you've spoken about the pluses and minuses, but could you elaborate a little bit more about the nuclear threat and whether you think this is going to try and get rid of the problem overnight, or how will South Korea push the peace process forward?
I think a couple of things. I think, the Korean unification is not a matter that can be settled by two Koreas. If, the history of past 70 years shows anything, I think it shows that it is a quite complicated, the affair. And as I said, the China and United States, Japan, and Russia all have a skin in the game. And I think, they have the different set of interest in terms of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. And that's one thing. And that means, and that's one thing. And also, I think when you look at the, the opinions of the Korean people, I can only speak for the, the South Koreans. I don't think, a lot of, South Koreans think that the unification is a very urgent matter as far as their, the life is concerned. We have seen an example of Germany. Germany, that was, if my memory serves me correctly, it was 1989. The two Germany were united, and they have had a very difficult time to have the two Germany integrated, and there's a great deal of costs involved in the process. And I'm pretty sure that all the things the unification, the promise hasn't been done yet, and that's one thing. And regarding the nuclear issue, have been some the missile tests by North Korea, and many South Koreans, I believe, do not have not paid particular attention to these North Korean tests. They have done so many times that we believe it won't break into a war. Both South and North Korea have been in this situation so many times that North Korea and South Korea know that it is the part of the established, the ritual perhaps. And then regarding the nuclear issue, I believe that I have talked to some people about the North Korea's nuclear capabilities, and I agree with them. And the consensus, at least among me and the people I talk to, is that left alone, North Korea's nuclear weapons would not pose as a great threat as the people may think, because North Korea knows. I think North Korea is the first country that knows that if it uses nuclear weapons, it would be destroyed outright. And the usefulness in their nuclear weapons that lies with not using it. Then perhaps knowing that, would we be willing to go over to war over the weapons that has a the greater chance of not being used? That's my thought.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And that's just the right point to now hear from our speaker, who can give us the Russian perspective. So I would now like to welcome Dr. Felix Petrovich. He is president of the Board of Trustees of the Russian Information Service Korean Radio, as well as the president of the non-governmental organization, the International Union of Korean Public Organizations for Promoting the Peaceful Unification of Korea, Gominryon. For these awards, he was awarded the Gold Star Patriot of the DPRK, the first among overseas Koreans. He is a surgeon, as is described at the very highest category, Doctor of Medical Sciences. So welcome, Professor Kim.
Добрый день, уважаемые друзья.
Good morning and good evening, my dear friends. We gathered here to discuss a very important issue. We are talking about reunification of Korea. If to talk about future presidential election in South Korea, I cannot, of course, predict, but my opinion is that Moon Jae-in will win. He is a great patriot of Korean nation, and when he came into office, then he could really improve the relationship between North and South. So I think that he satisfied all the desires of Washington as well. So I think that the one who will succeed Moon Jae-in's policy will win. It's about, if we talk about mass media, then we can say that the great majority of established newspapers and news agencies are guarded by international companies. I represent Koreans in Russia, so we established our own international mass media outlet. It's called Korean Radio. So we are trying to present our point of view. We are North Koreans in Russia. So I think you can learn the truth about what's going on inside of North Korea. You can find in our Korean radio. As a previous speaker mentioned about the unification of South and North, based on example of Germany. But it's not acceptable, this way of unification for North and South, because Kim Il-sung suggested the way for unification, that this unification should be consolidation and federation with equal rights. Then we can unite. Then he suggested to create confederation. So the unified country in terms of confederation, when every part would decide their foreign policy and economic policy. For example, free market economy in the south and state economy in the north. But in terms of international cooperation and communication, they will be presented as one unified state. But in order to achieve that, we should really work hard. But what I want to say, if we have some improvements in terms of relationship between South and North, then we have certain voices against coming from Washington. If we talk about nuclear threat, yes, it's because of nuclear arsenal of United States and the deployment in South Korea pushed North Korea to create their own nuclear arsenal. Kim Jong-il officially withdrew North Korea from the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapon. And after that, North Korea started working on creation of their own nuclear weapon. And then the pressure from outside world lessened on North Korea. I think that North Korea has nuclear weapon strong enough to target United States. Recently, I've heard some news that North Korea have gained supersound missiles. It's actually put, if it's true, then it puts North Korea on a very high level. But I don't think it's true. I think the unification and peace between two Koreas is an issue of two Koreas. Those who are in trouble should really put efforts into to solve the issue. I think Koreans can communicate with each other, can make negotiation, and can find peace and unification. The only thing that is necessary for that is that the United States would withdraw their troops from South Korean land. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, that was very clearly set out North Korea's position. And I think it's a lot for us to learn because we don't often hear the other side, and it's important to hear what they have to say compared to what we get in the Western media. So I'm sure there will be points that will now be picked up in the course of the discussion. So thank you very much to Mr. Felix Petrovich Kim. I will now move to Mr. Chad O'Carroll, Chief Executive Officer, Korea Risk Group. Chad O'Carroll, as we said, is the founder of NK News, a North Korea specialized news information and data service that serves researchers, academics, and business people around the world. O'Carroll established the website in 2010 while living in Washington, D.C. He was a fellow of the Toe Knight Center for Entrepreneurial Journalism and was previously the Director of Communications at the Korea Economic Institute of America. He has an MA in Nuclear Non-Proliferation and International Security from King's College London. So welcome, Chad O'Carroll, and it'd be very interesting to see what you have to say about what we've heard from Dr. Felix Petrovich Kim, and of course your own perspective on what will bring peace to the Korean Peninsula and what you are doing.
Sure. So thanks very much for the invitation to speak today, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. So I thought I'd just give you a quick, so we have the South Korean presidential election in just a few weeks. And while Mr. O from the Korea Times pointed out that unification is not really a top priority issue among the general public, I thought I'd just give you a brief overview of what the two South Korean presidential candidates are saying about North Korea, just so you get a sense for what their broad interests and what the differences are between the candidates and what that means moving forward. So we have on the conservative end of the spectrum, Yoon Suk-yeol, and then we have on the liberal end of the spectrum, Lee Jae-myung. These are the two presidential candidates. I'd say broadly speaking, first of all, both are relatively pro-engagement and focused on constructive ways to find peace with Kim Jong-un and the North Korean government, but there are important differences. I think so on Yoon Suk-yeol, a conservative candidate. I mean, he's criticized the Moon administration's efforts to secure an end of war declaration, for example, saying it would give big side effects if done before North Korean denuclearization. He's also had some slightly negative nuanced views on inter-Korean military agreements signed during the summitry of 2018. That being said, he has said that he'd be open to an inter-Korean peace treaty. He's open to unilateral economic aid towards North Korea, even things as radical as facilitating North Korean participation in things like the IMF and World Bank. He's also keen to support sanctions exemptions. But the key thing is, these are all economic incentives that he'd be willing to support if North Korea makes substantial progress towards denuclearization. And that's always been a very tough nut to crack. On missiles, nuclear weapons, military readiness, broadly, he's pro modernizing the military more, engaging in more deterrence, coordinated training exercises with the United States, also something that regularly bugs North Korea. And controversially, in fact, last September, he even said that he would prepare a formal consultation procedure on deploying US nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula in a time of emergency. And this was something he had to quickly walk back from, as it was so controversial. I think the one thing that's really struck me as being interesting about his candidacy so far is that he said he would be open to relaxing some of South Korea's laws on inter-Korean broadcasting and communication. As many of you know, in South Korea, it's very difficult to access North Korean media, and there are a lot of laws and legislation in the way. And he says, at least if there is reciprocity, he'd be willing to amend those laws, which would be really, honestly, a game changer, I think, for inter-Korean cooperation. On the other hand, we have Lee Jae-myung, the Democrat candidate. Broadly speaking, he is really in favor of mirroring most of President Moon Jae-in's policies, very nuanced differences. He's a big supporter of Moon's military modernization plans. I'd say one key difference is that he's keen to find more robust ways to respond to future North Korean military events like missile and nuclear tests. Interestingly, on people-to-people exchange, Lee Jae-myung says, interestingly, on unification, he said, ideological competition with the North and unification policy premised on Koreans being, quote, a homogeneous ethnic group are outdated. He stressed instead that there needs to be a more practical policy direction that can persuade the South Korean public of the need to unify. And some of the ways he's articulated this could happen is through increased inter-Korean tourism, increased cooperation. These are all things that the current President Moon Jae-in has been trying to do, but unfortunately, inter-Korean relations have taken several hits in the past couple of years that have really obstructed progress in this area. I'd say if you just take what I've said in context with what's been going on in international relations, there are several key obstacles ahead. North Korea has isolated itself a lot with COVID-19. There are no vaccinations yet in all of North Korea. And so it's very hard to conceive of North Korean officials engaging in physical diplomacy with South Korea anytime soon. It's also hard to imagine how North Korea would receive humanitarian aid from South Korea anytime soon, something both candidates have said they want to do. This is because with the COVID isolation, there are no NGO or United Nations staff left in North Korea, meaning it's very hard to imagine how international aid could be monitored or independently understood. Thirdly, there's the international sanctions regime, which is now so comprehensive that it's very hard to see how any inter-Korean initiatives could really pick up beyond sort of very verbal types of dialogue and things that don't require physical interaction. And lastly, I think most importantly, when you look at the peninsula and consider China-US geopolitical competition, North Korea is really falling in the last 2 years on the side of China in this sort of growing Cold War. And China, before COVID, did a lot to really facilitate a growth in tourism in North Korea from China. There was a lot of Chinese economic aid, humanitarian aid, and that relationship has really improved in recent years. And so I think the problem for South Korea and inter-Korean relations is that China, in many ways, North Korea doesn't feel any need to accept South Korean offers of aid or engagement because they usually come with higher standards of monitoring and so on. So there is a growing risk, I think, just longer term, that if this trend continues, it may make it harder for the two Koreas to cooperate directly. Yeah, I think broadly speaking, that's where I see things currently with the two presidential candidates and where things may move in the short to medium term. So I'll be happy to discuss this and other areas as we move throughout today's program.
Well, thank you very much indeed. There's so many interesting points to pick up. And as you said, you know, we've got in the background the US-China competition going on over gaining influence over what's happening in Korea and the obstacles ahead. So thank you very much, and we shall come back to those points. And now I'd like to invite Ambassador Warwick Morris, former ambassador for the UK to the Republic of Korea. Warwick Morris was a diplomat for nearly 40 years, between 1975 and 2008. He served 3 times at the British Embassy in Seoul for a total of 13 years, latterly as ambassador for 4 years. He made working visits to North Korea in 1991 and 2004, and from 2000 to 2003, he was ambassador to Vietnam. Since retiring from the diplomatic service, he has continued to follow events on the Korean Peninsula, commenting from the media, taking part in seminars and in various advisory roles. He served as chairman of the British Korean Society from 2011 to 2017. Warwick Morris received an honorary PhD in political science from Chunhyuan University in 2006 and was elected an honorary fellow of Robinson College, Cambridge in 2011. So you had a huge experience of South Korea working and also having visited North Korea. So do tell us what you think of the situation.
Thank you very much, Rita, for the introduction, and Peter for the invitation. Much appreciate being invited to take part in this discussion today. Yeah, I sometimes think I've been dealing with Korea too long, really. I think I'm becoming a little bit skeptical about the prospects for reunification, but and it's a subject which has kept many academics in work throughout their working lives. But it's important to discuss it. There's a lot of people and their futures at stake, and even if one is skeptical, it's right and proper to tackle it. Just a couple of points about this election generally before I talk more about reunification. It's an unusual election. Both the main candidates are not politicians. They come from different backgrounds. One, the governor of the important Gyeonggi province, and another chief prosecutor. So that's unusual. Another unusual thing is that the incumbent president, President Moon, still has a lot of popularity. It's become traditional in Korea for some years for the outgoing president to be pretty much rock bottom in terms of public opinion. But Moon Jae-in is getting high levels still of support, and I think that reflects partly a reflection partly of his efforts to deal with North Korea over the years. Seems to be a bit more noise coming from women during this election campaign as well, and Mr. Yoon's wife has been very outspoken, including about journalists, critical of her husband, and I see there's some talk of some sort of anti-feminist movements as well. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens about a month from now. It's very close also. Every time I see an opinion poll, one candidate or the other is 2 or 3% ahead, and it swings to and fro. And it has, on the whole, been traditional in recent years for a different party, a president from a different party taking over. This year, I think my money's just a little bit on Mr. Lee, who is, of course, the same party as Moon Jae-in. So that would be a little unusual to have somebody from the same party take over as president, but we're not there yet. There's another month to go. Chad has very clearly set out the differences in the two candidates, main candidates' approaches to North Korea and their views on security issues, reunification, and clearly there are differences. And it seems that Lee Jae-myung would, if elected, become very much a similar figure with similar outlook to Moon Jae-in. One thing we hear about from time to time is the idea of a peace treaty. That's been mentioned by President Moon. It may surface again. I find that interesting. I'm not sure what it would really achieve and what it would lead to and whether it would change anything. It's a nice idea. It sort of sounds good because there's never been a peace treaty. There's only been an armistice now for nearly 70 years. But I'm not very sure. I'd be interested in others' views as to whether it would really make a difference. And you have to bear in mind that the armistice was signed by a US Army general on behalf of the UN and signed by North Korean Army and Chinese People's Volunteers. South Korea was not a signatory of the armistice. But of course, if there was a peace treaty, this would, of course, involve South Korea very substantially and North Korea. Would it involve others? Who can say? So I think it's an interesting area, but I think it's a very complex one. And it'll be interesting to see if over the next 5 years, the next president, this idea is taken forwards and how it might evolve. Do the people of South Korea want reunification? Do they want it in their lifetime? Very few people now in South Korea are of an age where they remember their roots, some of them in North Korea, or have family members who are still alive, sadly not in North Korea. So there is hardly anybody in the population who has a strong personal individual link to North Korea, although the family, of course, may have. I was serving in Seoul in 1991. Berlin Wall came down, Germany reunified, as has been mentioned. Almost overnight, the young Koreans I knew and university students suddenly said, my goodness, this is going to be a costly and a very expensive exercise. It's going to hit our pockets. We'd have to find university places, housing, everything for a North Korean population. If the Korean Peninsula became one, this would be hugely expensive. We're not sure that we want that. And there was right across the board among young Koreans, there was this shock really when they saw how expensive the reunification of Germany was going to be. So there's an enormous cost factor in any reunification scenario. And I'm not sure what percentage of South Korea's population today wants to see reunification in its lifetime. Others who are living in Korea now may have other views, but I'm not sure that it's the be all and end all and the main focus of most South Koreans. Having lived there from the mid-70s when there was monthly air raid practices, daily curfew, a real fear of invasion and attacks from the north, tunnels being found, incidents involving submarines. That was a really dangerous era, and there were all kinds of incidents happening all the time at the border. People got killed. Today, it's very different. Yeah, there's nuclear weapons around. There's missiles being launched almost weekly by North Korea at the moment. But as one of the speakers has said, life goes on. I mean, people accept these as part of daily life. And anyone who hasn't lived in Korea, I think, might think must be scary. It must be frightening, but it's not. Life goes on in Korea. Life goes on in Seoul, just 45 minutes drive from the border. People on the whole are not worried. They don't lie awake at night thinking that North Korea is about to invade or that missiles are about to hit them. Reunification, if it does come, would be hugely costly. There's no doubt about it. And you've got two societies that are now totally different. I think it's a wonderful thing to have as something one day, but I frankly don't believe it's going to happen in the near future. But it's right to try. It's right to build links with North Korea, and it's right to try all sorts of methods, and many of these have been tried, particularly since President Kim Dae-jung's time. Sunshine policy, which was then carried forward by his successor, No Moo-hyun, when I was there again, all kinds of cross-border projects, visits, delegations, committees, Kaesong Industrial Zone, tourism in Kumgangsan, all kinds of things. And in the end, really have come to naught. 2 minutes. Have really come to naught, very sadly. But maybe these will pick up again. I hope they will. But so many things have been tried, and internationally, 6-party talks. I listened to Ambassador Christopher Hill a couple of days ago, listened to the former Canadian Prime Minister on one of your seminars. Christopher Hill was heavily involved when Ambassador and Seoul in 6-party talks. So things have been tried, and it's right to keep trying. I'm just not sure, on my last point, what North Korea really wants. I think, in a word, North Korea wants to overcome the South. I think that is policy, and I just don't see that happening. Lots of food for thought, and I hope some good questions there. I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You have given us a lot of food for thought. And I think what's been running through all the presentations is this strand of hard realism that, yes, everybody wants peace, but the path is not going to be easy. It's not going to be smooth. And then we're hovering in the background, of course, and with all the influences, what's going on between US and China and Russia's interest as well. So all these have to be pulled together, and it doesn't seem to me, and others could disagree, that from what you've all been saying, that we're going to have reunification tomorrow. And if there is reunification, then is it all going to be roses after that? And there have been parallels drawn with German unification. And I think, as we've heard from Ms. Doe, there are also lessons that can be learned from there, the good and the bad. So now I will pass on some questions that have been sent. Alina Ilyani, a graduate student from Russia. And she says the United States refuses to negotiate the Korean issue without China, but China will not agree to negotiations and will not become a third party to the nuclear treaty. But it is possible that China could join the talks if the DPRK participates. What do you think is the likelihood of North Korea considering such an option? But if the DPRK refuses, is there a plan B, as they say? So is this something perhaps that Mr. Petrovich Kim might like to take on to begin with? Hello, Mr. Kim.
Yes.
Hi. Is there some?
Can you hear me? So let's look at the situation in the world after the Second World War. 3 states, Germany, Japan, and South Korea. This was a state where the United States troops were dislocated, and the American troops still remained there. So these countries, Germany, Japan, and South Korea, still very much under the influence of the United States. But North Korea is independent in this sense. North Korea will never attack South Korea. That's for sure. I've been to South Korea and to North Korea. North Korea will not attack South Korea. They don't want another war because they're brothers and sisters. But German scenario is also not suitable for the Korean Peninsula. And of course, young people in South Korea will think about the cost of unification. It's not right way to think. North Korea suggested their own way of unification. It's a way of confederation, which will not influence the economic state. They wanted to be a unified nation only on international level. So in the international foreign policy, there will be one state, but in terms of in a policy, in terms of economy, they will be separated states. So North Korea will not ask for money. The North Korean development is going their own way, its own way. But as I already mentioned, that United States influenced South Korea a lot, and with their sanction and with their ideology, it influenced the international community and South Korea. So for me, it's very important to say to the world that so American troops should be withdrawn from South Korea. Then it will facilitate unification of North and South very quickly. Do you have any more questions to me?
No, that was that's very good and very clear to pass on to everybody a message that really looks that if we expect progress, then US troops have to be withdrawn from South Korea. It'd be quite interesting to see what others think. I don't know what you think. For example, Mr. Yoongjin Oh, how realistic is this? What is your response to what you've heard from Professor Petrovich Jim? Thank you.
Respect to the previous speakers, interesting, the point about the necessity of having U.S. troops withdraw from South Korea. I think it's the first of all, the presence of the U.S. troops in Korea. It's not not a unilateral arrangement. I think that's the consensus between the two countries, the Korea and United States, to maintain U.S. military presence on Korean Peninsula. I think when we look at the South Korea's position in connection with the U.S. troops here, some people, of course, in South Korea, want to see the U.S. troops pulled out. But I think the majority consensus, majority the belief is that the U.S. troops stay in Korea. The reason for that, I think, is that South Koreans do not believe in North Korea's intention. North Korea has not reached a point in which they mean no war with South Korea, because I think even though the dwindling number of South Korean, or for that matter, the people around the world to remember the Korean War. Korean War was the invasion, started by the invasion by North Korea at the start of the Cold War, with the support of the Soviet Union and China. And even though people, dwindling number of the people remember that, it is still remains in the history book. And we learn from the history book that we cannot trust the North Koreans entirely now. If North Korea, for instance, they give up its nuclear weapons, then we may, tempted to believe what, the North Koreans say about, the necessity of the U.S. troops withdrawal as, the condition to the two countries' unification. My thought.
Well, thank you. So now Dr. Felix Petrovich Kim would like to respond. And after that, I will go to Ambassador Warwick Morris, who has a question as well. So, Felix Petrovich Kim, what was your reaction to what you heard?
Я хотел, вот посол Великобритании начал насчет Корейской войны.
I would like to say about Korean War. Korean War was started by the United States, the 2 days before the invasion,
убедился в готовности войск и забрал все семьи сотрудников посольства в Японии.
it was 2 days before the invasion. All family members of ambassadors were taken away from Seoul and were moved to Japan. And it was discussed on an international level between ambassadors of different countries. So you should not say it that straight. But another point, the nuclear weapon is protecting its North Korea from outside world. And who would give that weapon? Because there is no guarantee that outside world will not attack North Korea, will not invade North Korea. And of course, we were very happy when President Moon Jae-in started to talk about unification, at least about facilitating negotiations. But right after that, under the influence of United States, he started to say about complete nuclear disarmament. But it's not right way to negotiate. I've been to South Korea, and I'm sure that South Korea doesn't want, people of South Korea don't want war, same as Northern Koreans. And North Korea will not attack South Korea. That's what I wanted to say again. It's misunderstanding that they want war.
Thank you, Dr. Felix Petrovich, for clarifying the point and for your response. Now, Mr. Morris, you've had your hand raised. What do you have to say to what's gone so far?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of things. Dr. Felix Kim mentioned China, and I didn't mention China and should have done. I mean, China is critical to North Korea. We shouldn't forget that. North Korea is dependent on China for its trade, almost all its trade, and for its fuel, its oil. If China were to tire of North Korea's missile testing and the treatment that is meted out to the North Korean people, and if China turned off the tap regarding trade and oil, North Korea couldn't continue and would collapse. But I don't think China is going to do that in the near future, in part because China doesn't want to have a large, democratic, unified Korea on its doorstep. But I can see a time, 10 years, I don't know, when China feels even more confident about its position in the world, when it might not be too fussed, too bothered about having a unified democratic Korea on its doorstep. Again, we're just looking into the crystal ball, but that's my view on that one. I'm not going to argue about who started the Korean War. I think it's a widely held view that it was the North, but let's not go there. Let's look to the future more. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Morris. There is now a couple of questions that have come in. We won't have room to fit everything in, but there's here one from Brian Corlett saying, would unconditional giving of humanitarian aid to North Korea open the way for changes in the relationship between the two Koreas in the West? Not always trying to get North Korea to give something up and so denying their pride, which seems like a very fair point. What do you think, Chad or Carol? Is this something that you would like to comment on?
Sure. Yeah, I have wondered during the COVID crisis if provision of a large amount of humanitarian aid to North Korea could have been welcomed. During the summitry of 2018, 2019, when relations soured between the two Koreas, Kim Jong-un in fact rejected a pledge of, I think it was 50,000 tons of rice aid from South Korea because of effectively the politicization of that. And so I've wondered, like, could there be a way to provide aid to North Korea that is frankly not seeking any public outcome? In other words, secret aid. I think that's the only kind of aid that North Korea would take from the West or South Korea at the moment, if it was provided on a condition that there was no expectations for anything else. Effectively, just free resources, be they agricultural, fertilizer, vaccines, whatever it may be. I think that's pretty, in the short term, those are the only conditions I can imagine the North Koreans accepting aid from the West. The reason I say that is because they are receiving aid on those terms from the Chinese. China, since the 5 summits between Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un in 2018, 2019, has donated what we estimate to be between 500,000 to 1 million tons of aid every single year in a non-public way. There's been no public confirmation of this. It can be seen in satellite imagery, however, in ports going into North Korea. And you can see the ramifications of that in a real warming of relations between Beijing and Pyongyang. And that's the competition. If the West wants to have influence, I think it would have to give aid on those terms. And frankly, that is a non-starter. The West and South Korea would need international monitoring. They'd need an independent needs assessment on the ground in North Korea. And Pyongyang is not going to be prepared to do those things anytime soon. So I feel in principle, yes, it could work, but the realities and challenges and competition within this area are quite significant. So it's unlikely, I think, to see any progress in this area soon.
Unmute. Yes, sorry. I was just saying that time is running on. We've got about 8 minutes left. So there's so much we can follow up, but I'm afraid I'll just leap to the next question, if I may, which is probably likely to be the last question before our speakers can sum up and talk about where we can go next. So there's this question from Giuseppe Calli, and he says, confederation is the closest option to reality at this time, at least to start with. Still requires a kind of united political body with a leadership. How can this be realized, especially if it will exclude by definition the USA, China, Russia, and Japan? That could not be part of it. So who would like to answer first? If not, shall I invite, how about inviting Mr. Yongjin Oh?
The federation, I think that's, the idea has been around for some time. I remember there was the TACR during the Kim Dae-jung administration when I covered the presidential affairs. But I think it's, it would be, first of all, I would say it would be very difficult for the reason the Rita you cited. Because I think it's any form of the structure that's that will change the status quo on the Korean Peninsula, that requires the agreement or consensus of other the stakeholders in this region, so-called stakeholders, United States, China, and Russia. So it's just the going for the federation type of things between the two Koreas on their mutual initiative. I don't think that one fly the far, and that's my answer. And on the top of that, the what do you expect from that system? If my memory serves me correctly, the roadmap provided by the Kim Dae-jung, says that the federation some, for some, period of time, two Koreas maintaining that system, and which, the hopefully lead to the more the form of a unification. But I think it's wishful thinking. I think it's the federation format itself, the wishful thinking, and I think having the peace through the federation format, or the wishing it will lead to the unified Korea. I think that's doesn't hold much water. The rather, I think realistically, I think it's the one or the other between the two Koreas. Absorption by the South Korea, I think from my perspective, that's mostly the realistic format at the moment. But it's not immediately. But we wouldn't, the people with the authority wouldn't say it. But I think it's would be the only realistic manner. If any other things to talk the federation or any other kinds of thing, I think it's just the disguise that the beneath it is the only option that is absorption, the unification by absorption. You could just maybe I'm too radical. Maybe I.
Thank you. Chado, Carol, you want to say something, and then we really have to wrap and get final statements. So we'll take your statement as a final statement as well. All right?
Sure. Thanks so much. I'd just like to also echo, I think, what Mr. O said. I mean, what's the point of federation when you just have two systems ostensibly under one flag that have no inter-Korean actual physical cooperation or exchange? I think the really important thing for those of you who are maybe new to this subject to understand is since COVID, in the last 18 months, we've seen a massive increase in North Korean ideological purity campaigns. There is new legislation now in North Korea which can lead to death sentences for anyone consuming South Korean media products. The fear in North Korea from the government of South Korean culture is so strong now that formal penalties have been increased for its consumption. And if you don't believe me, then I would invite you to look at the North Korean media coverage of when President Moon visited Pyongyang in September 2018 with a K-pop band. There is no North Korean media coverage of that K-pop band performing anywhere. There is no North Korean media coverage of President Moon delivering his speech, because there is huge fear in North Korea of the ideological pollution that this South Korean culture can provide. So I think there are huge barriers, mainly on the North Korean side, to any form of meaningful inter-Korean cooperation. And I'm very pessimistic, unfortunately. So with that, I'll pass you back the microphone, Rita.
Thank you. So that's very sobering. We now need to stop by about 11:20 European time. We've got 5 minutes to go. So could I just invite the others to make very brief closing statements, please? So first of all, can I invite Dr. Felix Petrovich Kim to just sum up very briefly? What do you see as the way forward now?
I think it's very important to have similar sessions and webinars. It's very important to share honestly with each other, to share our points of view about our problems. So I'm very grateful to the organizers of this webinar. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that Korea will finally be united, maybe in near or far future, but will be one country. Thank you so much.
Well, that is very encouraging, and I'm sure all the other panelists will be delighted to hear what you've had to say. Warwick Morris, how would you like to wrap up?
Thank you, Rita, and I've enjoyed our discussion with the other panelists and good questions. I think at the end of the day, we have to remember the ordinary citizens of North Korea and the miserable life that the vast majority lead in extraordinary isolation in this modern day. And so I do hope, for all my skepticism about some of the things that have been tried in the past and about attitudes towards reunification, I do hope that whoever becomes president will not give up attempts to build trust with North Korea. It's all about trust building. It's taken a hell of a long time. It's nearly 70 years since the end of the war. Trust isn't there yet, but I don't think you should give up. I think all the parties should continue to find ways of building bridges between South and North, and other countries like China, Russia, Japan, the US can help. So that's my hope, that efforts will continue to build trust wherever it leads. But trust building has got to be critical and has to be the first step. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Yongjin Oh, trust. We've heard building trust. We've heard how North Korea is, so concerned if there's unified Korea, they want to be on equal terms. So how would you sum up the way forward?
First of all, I think, on the spur of the moment, at the heat of the moment, I was a kind of, the sound, more pessimistic than I usually am. And as the other people on this panel said that it's, the patience is very important. 70 years we've been in this, the situation. It may take, another 7 years to get the, the things settled. I think that's the, the kind of attitude that we need. It's a, something. I think that we cannot make a haste. We can, if we make a haste. If we should make a haste slowly. I think that's the the summary of the situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think now I really must thank all the panelists for being so frank, so clear, giving the pluses, giving the minuses of how peace can be achieved. I really apologize to all the participants who've been sending in all their questions. There just hasn't been room to fit them all in. But can I now just invite Peter Zora, who set up this discussion, to say a few words to close the meeting. So thank you all, everybody, for this stimulating, thought-provoking discussion, and good luck to you all.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you all the panelists. It was really interesting, and I think there was a lot of hope also in the final statements. Mr. Kim gave a very promising statement, and all of you actually. So definitely UPF will continue these webinars and think tank, and we will inform you about the ongoing webinars and discussions. There will be a summit, global summit, in between the 11th and the 14th of February, and I hope you can participate in this summit. And I just want to tell you that now almost 300 watched this webinar via Zoom, but several thousand via social media. And there was a very lively participation. And please stay alert, stay with us. And if we can support peace on the Korean Peninsula, then we made an incredible contribution to peace in the world. With that, I'd like to conclude. And let me just introduce the next session. Will take place in at 1 o'clock Central European Time. It's a session organized by another association of UPF, International Artists Association for Peace, for Culture and Peace, AACP. And the title will be Overcoming Division on the Korean Peninsula Through Cultural Diplomacy and the Arts. So that will be the next session. If you have time after your lunch, please join this session. Thank you to all involved, and have a wonderful day or a wonderful night. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Dr. Kim.
Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Owen, nice to see you. Rita.
Goodbye. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye. Lovely to
Bye.
see you. Thanks.